Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video. Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video.
Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to Black Jewelries and join us for more powerful.
His gas pump clicked off at exactly 4:52 in the afternoon, and that was the last ordinary moment Broward County would have for a long time. Renee Ashford stood by her dented gray sedan,
replacing phone calls based on earphones of all patients of
a woman who had learned long ago that rushing never made a road shorter. Wore a faded green hoodie, jeans worn soft at the knee, and a pair of boots that had clearly walked more miles than most people's cars had driven. Nothing about her invited a second look. That was, in fact, the entire point. Sheriff Walton Bragg noticed her anyway, who had been parked across the lot of Tanner's Gas and Grocery for 11 minutes, engine idling, watching the road the way a man watches something he already believes he owns. It was not leaks years wearing that badge and taught he meant few of them useful. And the loudest of all was that nobody in Millhaven, Georgia, argued with him twice. Who climbed out of his cruiser slowly, chin tilted upward, thumbs hooked into his belt like a man rehearsing a scene he already knew the ending to. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, though there was no warmth riding on the word. "License and registration." Renee reached into her jacket without hurry and handed both over. She said nothing, because she had long since learned that silence, offered freely, cost her nothing and revealed even less. It was not supposed to be real. Bragg studied the documents far longer than any real inspection required, lifting every few seconds to study her instead of the paper. "It was state plates," he said. "Old car. You always drive alone, like this?" "I'm just passing through, Sheriff," Renee answered, her voice level as still water. "Is there a problem with my paperwork?" It was a fair question. It was also, to a man like Walton Bragg, the wrong one. It was something tightened behind his jaw, the way it always did whenever a stranger declined to shrink. "You got a problem answering my questions?" he said, stepping close enough that Earl Tanner, the station's owner, looked up from behind the register glass. Renee did not step back. "Was answered your question," she said. "I'm asking what the legal basis is for this stop." 3 seconds passed. 3 long, ordinary seconds that would later be replayed on a courthouse projector so many times that everyone in Broward County would come to know the exact shape of them by heart. It was young mother filling her tank near pump 2 pumps, lowered her phone from her ear, and quietly began recording, saying nothing. An old man leaning against his pickup shook his head just once and looked away. Nobody in Millhaven argued with Sheriff Bragg out loud, not where he could hear it. "Attitude," Bragg muttered, half to himself and half to the small gathering crowd. "I know an attitude problem when I see one." It was not supposed to be real. He unclipped to theatrical slowness, the way a man moves when he wants an audience to notice his patience running out. Renee only looked at him, steady and unblinking, and something about that stillness unsettled him more than shouting ever could have. "It was turn around," he said. "You're being detained after obstruction and failure to cooperate." The cold metal closed around her wrists at 4:58 p.m. As it did, that Renee said 4 quiet words, low enough that only he could hear them. "You sure about this?" He laughed, short and sharp, and pushed her gently toward the cruiser. "I'm always sure," he said. "Get in the car." It was not supposed to be real. Deputy Colston standing off to the side through the entire exchange, and he did not like the shape any of it was taking. He was 29 years old, 3 years on the job, and still young enough to believe that procedure mattered more than pride. "Sheriff," he said quietly, catching up as Bragg opened the crew door. "We don't really have grounds here, She handed over everything. Didn't resist. Bragg didn't look at him. "Around here, I'm the law," he said. "Now get her processed." Was at the station, Renee's phone was dropped into a plastic evidence bag without so much as a receipt. Her wallet was emptied onto a metal table and photographed item by item, as though she were the subject of something far larger than a routine stop plot. $41 in cash, She faded photograph on plane plane. Her car, still parked back at Tanner's, was radioed in for an unauthorized search. No warrant, no documented cause. Just a hunch dressed up as procedure. Was watched all of it with a knot, tightening, steadily stomach but lung senwater. He had nothing further. Questioning Walt Bragg in front of other officers was the fastest way to spend the next 6 months, writing speeding tickets on the loneliest stretch of Highway
14.
Was not supposed to be real. By the time Renee seated in the holding area, 3 separate cell phone videos of the arrest were already circulating between strangers' phones across Millhaven. None of them captured every word clearly. All of them captured enough a calm woman, who never raised her voice once, and a sheriff who raised his more than once. Renee looked up at the clock mounted above the booking desk. The second hand swept past the 12, at exactly 5:03 p.m. 5 minutes, she said quietly, to no one in particular. Mercer, some time with paperwork, paused. 5 minutes for what, ma'am? Only smiled faintly and looked back at the clock. You'll see, she said. The front desk phone rang for the first time at 5:07 p.m. Denise Whitlow, the station's tired front desk clerk, picked it up mid-yawn. Red Creek, sorry, Bryan County Sheriff's Office. Who's calling? A pause. Her frown deepened. Sorry, can you repeat that? Another pause, longer this time. Was set the supposed to be real. She set a grown heavy rear in her hand and looked toward the back office where Bragg had disappeared to finish paperwork. What, Sheriff, she called out. There's someone on the line asking about the woman you just brought in. Bragg waved a dismissive hand without looking up. Was take a message. I'm busy. Denise hesitated, then hung up, glancing through the glass partition at Renee's calm, patient posture in a way that made her uneasy for reasons she couldn't quite name. Minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, Denise answered before the first ring even finished. This is Army Command, a clipped official voice said. Require immediate confirmation on the status and location of a federal consultant currently traveling through your jurisdiction. Denise's pen froze up the above pad. I'm sorry, Army Command? The voice repeated itself. Slower, each word deliberate. We are aware that a woman matching the description of Renee Ashford was detained in your county within the last hour. We need to speak with your commanding officer, now. Denise nearly ran to the back office. Sheriff, you need to take this call. Bragg finally looked up, irritation flashing across his face. What now? He picked up the line without much interest, boots propped on the corner of his desk. Was it Sheriff Bragg, he said, his tone dripping with self-importance. The voice on the other end asked one question, calm and precise. Is Renee Ashford currently in your custody? Bragg chuckled. She's in a holding cell for attitude and obstruction, if that's what you're asking. Somebody important. There was a pause on the line, a long, heavy silence that made even Bragg's confident grin falter, just slightly. It was not supposed to be real. Then the voice said only one sentence before disconnecting. You need to release her immediately, and you need to do it right now. It was not supposed to be real. Bragg set the phone down, laughing under his breath and shaking his head like a man who just heard the punchline of a bad joke. It was not supposed to be real. Calling about some fumsan woman often able to muttered to Denise, who stood frozen in the doorway. Probably some activist group trying to rattle us. Get back to your desk. Before she could take a single step, the phone rang a third time. It was time. When she picked it up, her face went pale before the caller had even finished the first sentence. It was the Department of Defense, the voice said. We are calling regarding an active federal matter involving one of your detainees. It was not supposed to be. Denise carried the receiver into the back office with both hands, as though it might shatter if she moved too fast. It was Sheriff. It's the Department of Defense. Bragg rolled his eyes but took it anyway, more out of morbid curiosity than concern. It was as Sheriff Bragg, he said again, and, though with noticeably less swagger. Sheriff, the voice said, we understand you have to keep a named Renee Ashford. Need you to confirm her current condition and locate immediately. And we need you to understand that any harm that comes to her while in your custody will be treated as a matter of the utmost seriousness. Bragg's jaw tightened. She's fine, he snapped, sitting in a holding cell like anyone else who gives me lip during a stop. His voice did not raise itself. It simply asked, calmly and without emotion, "Do you understand who you currently have in custody, Sheriff?" Glanced instinctively through the glass partition, where Renault still sat, unmoving, as if the chaos building around her belonged to someone else's story entirely. "She's a woman I pulled over for out-of-state plates and a bad attitude," he said, the lie sliding out easily. The way small lies always weave 6 years of you never once being challenged. Voice paused long enough that Bragg almost thought the call had dropped. "Sheriff," it finally said, "we have satellite confirmation placing Miss Ashford's vehicle at that exact gas station at that exact time. We are not asking you what you think happened. We are telling you what we already know happened, and the gap between those two things is to keep up some expenses for you, personally." The line went dead. Bragg stood there holding the receiver, the dial tone humming faintly against his ear. And for the first time since the traffic stop began, a small, cold seed of doubt planted itself somewhere behind his ribs. Was made it this far, you already know this isn't going to end the way Sheriff Bragg thinks it will, but the reason why is about to get a lot more personal for him, so stay with me. Bragg turned to Denise, his voice quieter now, the swagger drained out of it. "Get me her file," he said. It was all of it. Without the plan, a young records clerk named Lacey Combs, only 4 months on the job, leaned toward Mowan's Ritzberg and Wichir's voice dropped that low. Was not supposed to be answer her. He was to be busy watching Pace the narrow office. He was running a hand over the back of his neck, the way he always did when something had gotten under his skin. Denise pulled up whatever the county database could offer, but there was almost nothing beyond a name, a date of birth, and a driver's license number that returned no flags, no warrants, no priors of any kind. It was that in itself was unusual. Most people who ended up in a holding cell had something, a ticket, an old citation, anything. Renee Ashford had nothing at all, as though she existed in the system only enough to be recognized, and not enough to be understood. It was not supposed to be real. Bragg scanned the printout twice, as if reading it a second time might reveal something the first pass had missed. "This doesn't tell me anything," he muttered. Denise shifted her weight in the doorway. "Maybe that's the point, Sheriff," she said quietly, immediately regretting it when he shot her a sharp look. It was not take the words back, because somewhere and in the back of her mind a thought had already taken root, the same thought slowly working its way through everyone in that building. It was not supposed to be real. Some people are dangerous because of what they've done. Others are dangerous because of what they've been careful never to show. Aside in the gathering dusk, 3 black turned off Highway 14 and rolled silently into the gravel lot behind the Breer County Sheriff's Office. With sirens, no flashing lights, just the low, steady hum of engines and tires crunching gravel, arriving with the quiet certainty of people who had teased and would never once needed to announce themselves to be taken seriously. It was not supposed to be real. Bragg watched through the window, his stomach tightening in a way he hadn't felt since his very first year on the job decades ago, back when things still had the power to frighten him. "Sheriff," Denise said quietly, "I think they're already here." Inside the holding area, Renee finally allowed herself a small private glance the window as headlights swept across the lot. Recognized the formation immediately, the spacing between the vehicles, the way they angled toward the exit rather than the entrance. Not the people care, along Kane's Quantacansa train to Steffing Trade Farts Night, so Spanapontes non-stunlen side on. Mercer noticed the shift in her expression. "You know them," he said, half question, half statement. "I know the kind of people they are," Renee said simply. It was not supposed to be enough. The SUV doors opened almost in unison, And the men and women who stepped out moved with the unhurried precision of people who had done this many times before. No shouting, no drawn weapons. Only a calm, deliberate confidence that felt far more intimidating than any show of force could have. It was a tall woman in a dark blazer led toward the front doors, federal identification badge clipped neatly to her jacket. Met them at the counter. Bragg met them at the counter. Some of the authority he had walked into that gas station with hours earlier. "Wasn't I help you folks?" he said, his voice not quite as steady as he wanted it to be. The woman held up her identification and let him read it in full before speaking. "Special Agent Renata Voss," she said. "It was Federal Oversight Division. I need every camera recording from this station, every office body-worn footage, and every document related to this arrest, within the next 10 minutes. Now hold on," Bragg said, trying to reclaim some footing. "This is my county, my jurisdiction. I don't answer to Agent Voss." She cut him off, her voice calm but immovable, kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty rather than politeness. It was not supposed to be real. "Sheriff stopped being your county the moment you put handcuffs, federal asset in the middle of an active operation. Who signed the arrest report?" Bragg hesitated only a fraction of a second before straightening his shoulders with the same misplaced pride he'd worn at the gas station. "I did," he said. "I signed it." Agent Voss looked at him for a long, silent moment, long enough that the silence itself became unbearable. "We'll need to speak with you privately, Sheriff, right now." While Bragg was led into a side office, another agent approached the holding area. For the first time since the handcuffs had gone on, something in Renee's posture eased, constantly freeing her, but about for and finally being set down. "Ma'am," the agent said gently, "we're very sorry for the delay." Renee gave a small, tired smile. "Not your fault," she said. "It was get me updated on the operation. Is the asset still secure?" The agent nodded once. "We managed to adjust in time," he said quietly. "It was close." Renee exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping for the first time in hours. "Close is better than compromised," she said. Inside the side office, Agent Voss set a folder on the desk and opened it without ceremony. "Sheriff, do you know who Renee Ashford is?" Bragg shook his head, his bravado now replaced with a tight, defensive silence. "She is a former defense intelligence officer with 19 years distinguished rich service," Voss said, sliding a page across the desk. "Currently serves as a special advisor to the Department of Defense on a classified witness protection corridor. This afternoon, she was relocating a protected witness through this exact route at this exact time, cleared as low risks, specifically because it was unremarkable." Was slid a second page across the desk. "Common on nearly 2 decades, and assignments across 3 countries. Very agreeable." Bragg didn't fully understand the meaning of. Was brief generals of conscience pit. He quits pro Congress. Because these was he conscience as trias planetishnosti was driving quietly tough things. Issue is quite being TZE framework in incarnate funny all much. Easing talk turning no bemalt noi when and where being tars the entire planet depended on nobody noticing her. Noticed her, Sheriff. For exactly the wrong reasons. And then you made sure everyone else noticed her too. It was not supposed to be real. Bragg stared down at the paper without really seeing it, the words blurring as the weight of it settled over him. "Her arrest," Voss said, "took her off the road for close to 3 hours. It forced an emergency change to the extraction plan. What lives at risk, Sheriff? Not hypothetically, actually, because this and put it and was on the on to didn't be shunned and didn't answer her phone because you had confiscated it. He had to assume the worst and move without her." "I didn't know," Bragg finally said, his voice smaller than he intended. "That's exactly the problem, Sheriff," Voss said. "You didn't ask. You didn't check. You saw a black woman driving alone at home in a car. It looked wrong, and you built an entire kite out of the dark. That fact, she asked you a reasonable question instead of obeying without thought. It was not law enforcement. That's a man addicted to being obeyed. And today, it very nearly cost this country an operation, 2 years in the making. Bragg tried once more to find solid ground. I have 26 years of experience reading people, he was rising with the last flicker of his old certainty. It was not supposed to be real. I know when somebody's hiding something. Voss looked at him without any particular anger, which somehow made her next words land harder than shouting ever could have. Read a calm woman answering a legal question calmly. She said, "And you decided that calm itself was the crime." It was not 26 years of experience, Sheriff. That's 26 years of never once being able to know by anyone with the power to make it stick. Well, today, someone finally has that power. Word of the black SUVs had already spread through the small station, and by the time Voss stepped back out of the side office, nearly every officer on shift had found some excuse to linger near the front desk. It was not supposed to be real. Mercer stood near the holding area, arms crossed, the growing witness at the guest, or the once growing certainty that he had watched what far worse unfold than he'd originally understood. It was not supposed to be real. A heavy-set veteran deputy named Carl Denning, who'd worked under 3 different sheriffs, passed through Svikilahan Ishin and muttered, "Sinen Nevern Aegis Pete's Fjord Holser." But never like this, never this quiet, never this certain. It was not supposed to be Ojo, who had transferred in from a neighboring county the year before, watched the analysts working through the footage and felt something close to relief settle over her, the quiet guilt fleet of someone who had long suspected that one of these who wants to play some subtle-hiding wanted to look, and who was finally watching somebody with the power or to actually look. Nice was ordered to pull every piece of footage the station possessed. Within the hour, a small team of federal analysts had set up laptops within the break room, viewing frame by frame. A gas station security camera showed the entire stop. Mercer's body camera had Helon audio, the whole time including his own quieted objection that Bragg had brushed us without a second thought. It was the bystander videos, already circulating in small pockets online, showed the same story from 3 different angles, each more damning than the last. Agent Voss reviewed clip after clip in near silence, occasionally exchanging a glance with a colleague. There was no dramatic reaction, no performance for an audience, just the quiet, methodical work of documenting exactly what had happened and exactly how badly it had violated procedure. At one point, she paused the footage on a framklestunas to Remindsfuls. His expression twisted with irritation over nothing more than a calmly worded question. It was the whole case right here, she said. We don't even need anything else. By the time the analysts finished, the list of violations filled several pages. No articulable legal basis for the stop. A vehicle search conducted without consent or warrant. Personal property seized and handled with no documented procedure. It was not built entirely on one man's subjective judgment that a woman they was space tone morn of voice wheeled assertic whatever she was legally entitled to assert. It was not supposed to be real. Voss compiled it all into a single report and set it in front of that county's assistant district attorney, a soft-spoken man named Gregory Payton, who had been summoned in a hurry and now sat reading it, his face growing paler by the paragraph. It was not supposed to be real. Bragg watched from a chair near the front of the station, no longer having anywhere left to direct his frustration. His deputies avoided his eyes. Denise kept her attention fixed on her computer screen. Years simply in the sheriff to keep his job, found himself unable to look at the man without a wave of quiet disgust rising in his chest. In 15 years, Payton finally said, rubbing his eyes with both hands, "I've never seen a file build itself this fast, tofters, or this completely." Voss nodded, unsurprised. That's what happens when a man believes for 26 years that nobody's ever going to check his work, she said. Stopped being careful a long time ago. By early evening, Agent Voss returned to the side office and asked Bragg to stand. "Riff Walton Bragg," she said. "Effect immediately. You are being relieved of your duties pending a full federal and state review of this incident. We'll need your badge and your service weapon. Bragg stared at her, as though she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. Can't do that, he said, his voice cracking at the edges. This is my department. I was elected. Elected officials are not above federal law, Sheriff, Boss said, unblinking. Right now, you are the subject of a federal investigation into unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and interference with a national security operation. Your badge, please. For a long moment, Bragg didn't move, his hand hovering near his belt, as though physically incapable of accepting what was being asked of him. It was Mercer who finally stepped forward, gently, almost apologetically. Sheriff, he said, it's over. Just give it to them. It was not supposed to be real. Something about hearing it from his own deputy, he had mentored and belittled in equal measure for years, seemed to break through whatever denial Bragg had been clinging to. Slowly, he unclipped his badge and set it on the desk. He unbuckled his holster that had begun to tremble. He said nothing else. There was nothing left to say. Renee, now released and sitting quietly in the front area, a cup of water someone had finally thought to offer her, watched the exchange without any visible satisfaction, no flicker of vindication on her face at all. It was not supposed to be real. When Voss approached her afterward and asked if there was anything she wanted done differently, any request regarding how the situation moved forward, Renee simply shook her head. Want it handled correctly, she said. That's all. Not harshly, not for show, correctly. Within days, had made it their way into local and then national coverage, though Renee herself declined every interview request. It was not supposed to be real. Reporters gathered outside the Broward County building, cameras aimed at Dawes' office, who now moved with visibly more caution, as though the whole department had been patient awake from some long, comfortable sleep. His eyes began coming forward with stories of their own process, built nothing. The current on and inducted with apartment culture that had allowed one man's ego to operate unchecked for decades. Internal supposed to be real. An instant Ostas Farsted agent opened of Omalaya review, and it didn't take long before a pattern became impossible to ignore. A woman named Teresa Kowalski described being detained for nearly 2 hours. After questioning, she'd pulled over in her own driveway. It was a man named Julie Boyd described being threatened with additional charges simply for asking to see a supervisor. Retired Deputy Harold Vance, who'd left the department 11 years under circumstance nobody at the time explained, gave a lengthy statement describing Cholich requesting the sheriff's judgment, even quietly, even privately, was treated as an act of disloyalty worth punishing. Described being reassigned to overnight shifts for 6 straight months after raising concerns about Renee a stanic dental kinerd a tutorult. Unexplained, Wesanic taid galdi suspicious belly and detained more than nervousness in his voice. Was not supposed to be real. Vance's statement, Luchimai Delant Neely period, became one of the cornerstones of the growing case proof that this had never been a single sad afternoon, but a visible tip of something that the department had spent years quietly burying. None of these stories had gained traction before, not because they lacked truth, but because nobody with enough power had ever been willing to look. Now, with federal eyes fixed firmly on Millhaven, looking away was no longer an option for anyone. The Kent County Attorney's Office announced it would review every arrest Bragg had personally used in the past, and then once tallied exceeded 380 cases. His rights attorney named Wendell Marsh took on several of the reopened cases pro bono, working alongside a small coalition of local advocates who had spent years trying and failing to get anyone in power to pay attention to Broward County. It was not supposed to be real. The tragedy, what happened to Renee Ashford on that particular afternoon, Martians later told a courtroom, but how ordinary it had become long before she ever drove through town, was not supposed to be argued, and the mounting evidence increasingly supported him
had never been an isolated lab staff's judgment, but a pattern so deeply worn into the department's culture that everyone around him had simply learned to treat it as weather,
something to be endured, rather than something that could be changed. It was not supposed to be real. Renee declined every microphone placed in front of her. When one persistent journalist finally reached her by phone weeks later, he on only a single sentence before ending the call politely. "Nobody is above the law," she said. "Not the people who break it, and not the people whose job it is to enforce it." We thanked the reporter for their time and returned to home whatever quieter still fill days her the public would likely never fully understand, and that she had never once needed them to understand. In order to it mattered. Grand jury was eventually convened to review the strongest of the Riopo cases. Whilst several of the older incidents fell outside the statute of limitations, prosecutors moved forward on 3 counts tied directly to that single afternoon: unlawful detention, illegal search, and interference with a federal operation. Bragg's attorney negotiated for months, arguing exhaustion, arguing decades of otherwise clean service, arguing that his client had simply misjudged single ill counter under ordinary pressure. The footage told a different story every time it played back in front of a judge. The same calm woman, the same unearned hostility, the same certainty on Bragg's face that no one would ever make him answer for it. It was not supposed to plea agreement that barred him permanently from holding any position in the state of Georgia again. A quiet ending, far quieter than the noise he'd made getting there. Months passed, and Broward County slowly began to change in ways both visible and invisible. New sheriff, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia Renfro, who had spent 15 years working federal cases before returning home, took over the department and immediately implemented a wave of reforms. Every stop now required documented, articulable cause before any detention could occur. Previously papishly optional and often at convenient moments became mandatory, with random audits conducted by an independent oversight board. Officers went through expanded training on de-escalation and constitutional rights training that emphasized again and again that a citizen's calm insistence on their own rights never, under any circumstance, grounds for arrest, was not supposed to be real. Andy Cole, our shelf leadership, Tiny found himself able to fund a squad of officer he had always quietly wanted to one who spoke up the first time. Not only after they had already been done. It was not supposed to be real. He often thought back at that after station to the moment he'd voiced his doubt and been overruled, and he himself he would never let a badge convince him that silence was the safer choice. It was not supposed to be desk, though she now kept a small handwritten note taped to the edge of her monitor. It read simply, "Ask twice before you assume." Faith Ojo was eventually telepaid. He newly formed the accountability unit, a position that hadn't under the old leadership, and they never would have. Carl Denning, the end of his chose to retire quietly rather than adapt to the new standards, telling anyone who'd listen, policing wasn't what it used to be. A list of his former colleagues understood exactly what he meant by that, and were relieved to see him go. Even Earl Tanner, the gas station manager who had watched the whole unfold from behind his registers, found humps, not as telling the story differently, with each passing not as something shameful he had witnessed and failed to stop, but as the day he first understood that silence was his choice, and not always the safe one. Renfro, in her first public address, stood before a small crowd outside the station and spoke plainly, without notes, without the careful evasiveness that so often colors speeches like that one. She told them the department had failed not once, but repeatedly, and that the failure had been allowed to continue because too many people, herself once included, had decided it was easier to look away than to demand something better. Promised no miracles, only steady, visible change. He speech, but not in speeches, bleat to might now actually be investigated in NRH Dines Narg, or Mongchi ton Eve Unarton BB. It wasn't a perfect speech. It wasn't meant to be. But it was honest, and in Bryan County, honesty from behind that particular podium had been in short supply for a very long time. Nearly 8 months after that first arrest, Renee Ashford found herself driving through Bryan County again, this time on nothing more urgent than a visit to an old colleague who'd relocated nearby, who hadn't planned to stop. But as she passed the familiar gas station on the town, on her, something idios, the twas Polden, tires crunching oned over the same gravel they'd crossed months before, under very different circumstances. It was not supposed to be real. Earl Tanner recognized her almost instantly. He came out from behind the counter, and of it in his apron, Mud King, with a hesitance that had suggested he wasn't entirely sure how the conversation would go. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I remember you from back then. I'm real sorry about what happened here that day. I should have said something. Was not should have stepped in." Renee looked at him long moment and long a more anger in her expression, only a kind of tired, honest patience. "It's not your job to police the police," she said gently. "But thank you for saying that now." Earl shifted his weight, glancing to the pumps where her car sat quietly filling. "You're not angry," he said. "More a question." Renee considered it seriously before answering. "If a system is capable of correcting itself," she said, "then trust isn't gone. It's just been tested. That's different from being broken." Earl lingered a moment longer. "Can I ask you something?" he said, and she nodded for him to continue. "Weren't you ever scared, sitting in that cell, not knowing how it was going to end? Was worried about the mission? About the burn depending on me not this enough. I wasn't worried about myself because I already knew the truth was on my side, and the truth doesn't need me to be afraid to still be true. It was not supposed to be real." Earl nodded slowly, turning the words over, and told her he thought he'd remember that for a long time. Smiled, said goodbye, paid for her gas, turned and returned to her car, Harry matters to their permanenter, winning then orning ease eing the winning what he's forgoundage. No need to real him what had happened in front of the man who had already carried enough guilt, simply watching from behind a counter. It was not supposed to be real. As she pulled back on Highway 14, the gas shrinking in her rearview mirror, the late noon sun, and turned, the whole briefly gold, the kind of light that made even an ordinary stretch of road look like it had something worth remembering about it. It was somewhere behind her. Bryan County continued its slow, steady process of rebuilding a department, learning, sometimes painfully, that authority, without accountability, was never really authority at all, only the illusion of it, propped up by silence, and by the assumption that nobody with enough power would ever bother to ask questions. It was not supposed to be real. Agent Marcus Reyes, the man forced to complete that first extraction, lighter for the meter to let the danger often retake night. Without make for the she'd handled its aftermath without bitterness, without theater, simply insisting on the shop's should be allowed to work the way it was designed to. He said it taught him something about patience, that no training manual ever could the difference between winning an argument and simply long enough for the truth to catch up. Agent Voss kept a printed copy of the original case file in her own office long after it closed, not as a trophy, as a reminder of how quickly ordinary power, left unchecked, can curdle into something far uglier than anyone watching from the outside might expect. Power can silence a person for a few minutes, an hour, even an entire afternoon spent behind bars, for nothing in the crime of asking a reasonable question. It cannot silence the truth forever. Not in an age where cameras capture what badges try to bury. Not in a system that, however imperfect, still occasionally capable of looking honestly at itself and choosing even belatedly to make it right. Walton Bragg had believed for 26 years that his authority made him untouchable. It took exactly one phone call and one calm, unshemarken woman to prove him wrong. It would take considerably longer than that for him to understand just how wrong he truly was. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Whose resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.